All right, good afternoon, guys. You're welcome to I think they should be day 4 of HTML and CSS online live sessions on YouTube. So, before today, in our previous sessions, we were able to build out the landing page of an agency or a travel agency web page, and that was really nice and really interesting to build out. In today's session, we are going to be building a registration form. As you can see from my screen, I have the design for the registration form, and let's dissect the design together. First, we have the background of the design, which is some like light black, if I must say, and we have the logo as well, and I'm going to show us two different ways of repeating the same kind of logo. And then we also have the input fields as well as the create account button, followed by the text, just indicating what the particular form is for. So this is entirely what we are going to be building out today, just in the same manner we were able to build out the project from the last session. Now, like I earlier said, whenever we want to build out HTML and CSS projects, our very first step involves creating a folder. Now, it's a very important step, like I said earlier, so we need to do that. Now, I will be creating a folder. Just a second, please. Now, I would be creating my folder right about now. And like I said earlier, I like doing that on my desktop. And that is simply because creating my folders on my desktop for me makes it easier to find. I have a lot of other folders in my documents and other parts, but I have less folders on my desktop. So creating new folders in my desktop makes it really easy for me to find those folders. Now first, I'm going to have to do that. And to do that, I'll click on new and folder, and the name of my folder is going to be form. I have to create the name of the folder, form. My folder name is called form, and like I said earlier, the next step will be for us to open this out in Visual Studio Code. So I'm just going to open it out and open with code. Yes, perfect. Great. Now I have my form opened up and opened out for this particular session. As you can see, folder is empty, no files right inside, absolutely nothing. Now we can start creating our files in the folder. So if I create this, I have new file, and I like calling my very first file index. So it's going to be index, and with the extension HTML. Good. Now I have index.html already created. Next step will be for me to create the boilerplate, and after doing that, we'll go right back to the designs. Good. First step done and dusted. Now the next step for us here would be to make sure that we tailor this boilerplate to suit our designs. All right. Now the first will be for me to change the title, and the title is going to be registration form. Now let's take a look at what we've been able to do so far, and to do that I'll right click and I'm going to open with live server. Just a second, it's loading live server up. And yes, here we go. We have our setup done and complete, and just so that we can be sure that what we've done so far is the correct thing, if you take a look at our title here, it says registration form, the exact same title we have in our code. So that's an indication that what we have done so far is perfectly correct. Now the next step again will be to create our second file, which is the CSS file. And to do that, in the empty space again, I'll right click and I'll say new file, and I'm going to call it style.css. And my next step would be to link the CSS file to the HTML file. Now to link that, I'll come right back in the head, and I'm going to link it here. To do that, I'll use the link tag, LINK, link CSS, and the name of my CSS file is style.css. Now I'm just going to write that out here myself, just so I'm sure. Style.css. Great. Now, I just want to test this out to be sure that my CSS is linked correctly. And what better way to test it out than to add a background color to the body? Now walk with me, let's test that out. I'm going to say body. I'm going to give a very weird looking color just so I see it work. And I'm going to say the background color, and that is going to be, let's say, blue violet. Now let's see. Perfect. Now this is indicative of my CSS being properly linked. Now I can take out the background color and even take out the entire body tag, and we'll go right back to our design. Now let's take a look at our designs. Taking a look at our designs, you can see we have a container that has a logo and some fields. And one thing I like doing, firstly, would be to add our logo as a favicon. Remember what I called this in our previous class? I called this a favicon. Now, first thing I'll do would be to download the logo. And to download the logo, I click on the logo, it's Lockstar, and I'm going to export it from Figma. And I'll click on Export Lockstar. I'm sure I have the logo now, so I'm just going to export Lockstar. And there we have it. Now, although I can simply take this Lockstar logo and place it directly in the folder that I'm working on, and remember, we call the folder form. I can totally take that logo and place it directly inside of the form, whereas that would be very bad practice, because we want to structure our forms and folders in a very good way so that it's easy for us to find errors and fix them. So to do that, instead of putting the logo directly in the form folder, I'd create another folder here, and I'm going to call that folder assets. Now this folder is going to be responsible for holding all images that we're going to be having for this project. And we actually have just one image, and that's the image of the logo. So I'm going to add that image right now. So I'll minimize this and go back to my desktop. And I already downloaded the logo. I'm going to click on downloads. This is the logo. And here, let me open it up just to be sure. I'll open it up. Just a second. Great. Now it's the exact logo I'm looking for. So I'm just going to copy it, or rather cut it, and then I'll paste it directly inside of this folder. Good. Now, if I go back to my Visual Studio Code, I would be able to see my image and my assets folder appearing in the same form. Now, it's time for us to make sure that this logo we have here is going to be our fav icon. Now, a fav icon is that small logo that appears right beside your title in a website. So once we're done with what we're doing now, this broken image icon you see here would switch from being this to the Lockstar logo. Now, let's do that in steps. Now, the first step would be to go back to our HTML and right inside the head. Trust me, you can place it absolutely anywhere in the head. I could decide to place it right here. Let me do that. So in our previous samples, I've always placed it at the bottom, but today I'll be placing it right here. And I'll need a link tag. And all I need to do is simply type the text link. Now, but what I want to link is a fav icon. And I select fav icon. I'll select the fav icon, and I'm going to delete a few things. Now I'm going to delete the name, shortcut icon, and I'm also going to delete the type because I don't really need, I don't have multiple types. I'm going to delete that. But for the href, what I'm going to have is a path to my icon. So I'm going to have dot slash assets and lockstar dot png. Now if I go back to my file and I reload, you can see that we have the Lockstar logo appearing right here right now. I'm going to give us a few seconds, about 10 seconds, to try to follow up with what I've done, see if you get the same exact results, and then we would continue. Alright, now have you guys been able to try this out? If you have, now let's continue. But if you haven't, please feel free to leave us your questions and your difficulties down in the comment section, and I'll do well to attend to those questions. Alright, now let's go on and again back to our design. If you notice, I'm always having to switch from the designs down to the output because it's important we understand the designs first. Now, the first thing I would want to do would be to create the background for our form. And as you can see, it doesn't occupy the entire stretch of our background. Rather, it occupies a particular percentage. So we're going to have to do that. And like I explained earlier in this YouTube live series, whenever you want to create a container, you need a div tag in HTML. So I'm going to be creating that div tag right about now. And right in the body, and like I said earlier, whenever you're creating something for your website, always remember to put everything, all the content for your website, from the navigations down to the footer, all of them should be contained in the body. It's only specific things you're very sure you want to make your entire web page aware of that you put in the head. And examples are my shortcut icons and the style sheet. Now, for the body, let's create a div. Now, I'm going to create a div called container. I'm just going to call it container. Great. Now, if I go back to my browser and I try to look for the results, notice I don't get anything. And that is because a container is still just a container, except when you begin to fill it in with details. Now, the first detail we'd want to do is define the sizes of the container. Back Right back here, I will need to define the sizes. As you can see, I already called the container with a class name container. So I'm just going to be specifying that class container dot container, and I'm going to be specifying the width. Now the width would be about 40%. Let's just see. Width should be about 40%. Now let's take a look at what we have here, and again, you wouldn't notice anything too different. I have a width of 40%, but again, the background color is white, so it matches with the background color of our body. So for us to know that we have a div currently active on our web page, let's give it a different background color. And like a friend usually says, background colors are usually ways of debugging. So let me say blue for my background color right about now, and let's check again. Wow. Okay, I think there must be something wrong somewhere. Container, maybe with the spellings. Done with let me give it a height as well, a height of say 50%. Let's see. So there's something wrong with our file. Hold on. Now this happens a lot of the time. It happens a lot of the times. So let's see. Now first, let me be sure that our body actually still works. Body. Okay, the CSS is linked properly, so we just have to do this different. Now again, I have the container. Now let me try to style the container differently. Instead of using percentage, I'll be using pixels. So I'll be right here, and I'm going to say dot container, which is the name of my class, and I'm going to give it width of say 200 pixels and a height of say 600 pixels. 600 pixels. Good. Now, again, we don't notice anything, but as soon as I change the background color, we should see something different. So the background color of this, let's say aqua, just so we see something different. Great. Now you notice how we are able to see the same div we had created earlier. The only difference now is, instead of the background color being aqua from our design, the background color should be black. So I'll change that aqua to black. Black. Great. Now let's take a look at what we currently have. Now there are two different ways of specifying the width and height. You could either use the percentage, or you could use pixels. Now the percentage always tries to grade your width and height using your current screen size, but the pixels just specifies dedicated width and height to our container, and that's exactly what I was able to do, and that's exactly what I wanted to do. But taking a closer look at this, if you look at our registration form again, the design, I believe the width is a lot more than 200 pixels, and this is tending towards 400 pixels. So why not, let's change it from 200 to 400 pixels of width. So 400 pixels, and let's take a look at what we have now. Should be great. It's a lot wider. Good job. Now I'm going to give us 5 minutes to try to repeat this, and we'll continue. Now if you try to do that, and if you have any questions, or if you have any difficulties trying to repeat the steps, please feel free to ask your questions down in the comment section below, and we'll do well to get back with responses. Okay, now not to mention as well that we would also leave the link to the source code in the comment section after the live. So I'm just going to give us a few seconds to try to repeat this, and then we'll be right back to complete what we have started.
Will you hurry up, man? Open the door.
Okay, now let's see if you guys have been able to recreate this. Are you ready? If you have, let's go on. If you haven't, please feel free to leave questions to any challenge you might be having in the comment section down below. Now let's continue. Now, taking a look at what we already have so far, we need to make sure that this div is actually centered, because if you look at our design, I believe the div, the black with the black background, is properly centered on our screen. Wouldn't you want us to center our div as well? Now let's go. Now there are various ways of centering the div, and I'll show us two. The first is by calling the margin auto property, and the second would be by using the text align center property. Now the first thing I'll do will be trying to use the margin auto property, but we don't just use the margin auto property just like that. You have to also understand that you're trying to center something inside the body. So the first thing we need to do will be to use our body as a selector. And now that is because if you look at our HTML, we have a div right inside the body, and we want this div to be at the center. So if we say margin auto for our body, then we would have made sure it is at the center. Now first, we could do this by saying margin auto. And this also tries to help us center the div in the same way text align center would help us to do. Text align center. Now text align center is a property that tries to align every text inside of the body to the center. Now let's take a look at what we have. Okay, hold on. Again, we have a bit of a glitch. Margin auto. Again, we have a bit of a glitch, which is not uncommon, but at the same time, we are also very capable of making sure that this works. So since we try to style the body using the body tag, which is obviously a normal phenomenon, because the body is a special tag, and sometimes it can actually give a bit of a glitch because it's not expecting that we style the body. But one thing we can also do would be to leave the body tag alone and then begin to style the div. Now for the div, I can come right back here, and I can also decide to add margins. Now remember that this whole div, this whole black color is our div, and like I said in our previous class, a margin is the space around, not inside, but around the element. So on this, I can decide to add margins, and I can add a margin to the left hand side of say 583 pixels, 583 pixels. This should help me move it somewhere close to the center. Exactly. So 583 is a bit much, So we could also do 560 pixels. Still a lot less, and so maybe 520 pixels, and 20 is still a bit less, so 510 pixels. Perfect. Now this is one way, and we could also use the margin auto property to automatically center it. We could also use the margin auto property, margin auto, to also try to automatically center it. I just had to use that so that we would definitely see the difference between when we're trying to use values to center our div and also trying to use the margin auto. Now, although I was able to get the value of 510 pixels in order for me to center my div, sorry, margin to the left of 510 pixels, which helps me center it. But at the same time, it's easier and a lot better for us to allow the computer center it for us by simply calling the margin property instead of margin left and setting the value to auto, which means automatically add margins to all sides of our div, thereby centering the div. Again, I'll give us a few seconds to try to repeat the steps, and then we'll be back. And when we get back, we'll be working on the edges. All right. So have you been able to center your div properly using the margin auto property? If you have, let's continue. But if you still have found anything difficult, again, please do well to leave your comments down below, and we'll attend to your comments one at a time. All right? Okay. Now the next task would be to actually add curved edges to our div. And as you could guess, that's also very impressive and interesting. First thing we need to do is to realize that to add curvatures to our divs, what we need is a border radius. So to do that, again, still on the container, I'm going to be adding a border radius. So I can add border radius, and I can specify its values in pixels. So I can say 40 pixels just for trials. Let's take a look at what 40 pixels looks like. There you have it. And I think 40 pixels is really close, but I think 35 would just be perfect. So I'm going to reduce 40 pixels to 35 pixels. There we have it. Now 35 pixels is perfect. Now it's worthy of note to also mention that apart from just adding the border radius, if we wanted to add an actual border, we could do that by specifying the border property. You could say border, and remember from our previous class, we have three different values we can specify to the border property. First, we need to specify its thickness. Let me say 4 pixels, and you could also say solid, depending on the type of border. And let me give it a different color. Let me say blue, just so we see the difference. Now you see a 4 pixel solid border around the div. Even though we won't need that, but I'm just going to show that. I think you can see it. Now we have a 4 pixel solid border around the div. Now, but we don't need the border. We don't need the border, so I'll be taking it out entirely. I'll take out the border. And right about now, there we have it. And before we go on, I'm just going to try to make this dark color a bit lighter. Now, here, I think it's going to be a bit lighter. This looks better. Great. Looking similar to what we have here. Perfect. Now, it's time to add our very first step, which is to add the logo. Now remember, I promised that I was going to show us two different ways of adding this logo. And the very first would be to add it as an image. Now remember, earlier on we downloaded the image of our logo and we saved them in a folder called assets. As you can see, the image is called lockstar.png, and I can actually add that as a logo. Now, first thing I'll do is, remember from our yesterday's class, we mentioned that to add an image in HTML, you would always need a tag. And yes, we would be needing an image tag. An image tag is img, select that, and now here we have it. Let's add our image by specifying the source. So src is short for source, which means where is the image coming from. So you can specify an online source using the URL, or you can specify a path. So to do that, you have /assets and lockstar.png. Now there you have it. You can see it appears directly at the top. Now we're going to center it, but before we center it, let me also show you how to actually add the same text, but this time without using an image. Now I'll take this image out. First of all, of course, I'm going to add the image back, but I just want to show us how to do this using text. Now, to add text in HTML, we will be needing a text tag. Now, there are seven text tags, and they differ in sizes, starting from the largest to the smallest. We have H1, H2, H3, H4, H5, H6, which all stand for headings 1 to 6. And after the headings, we now have the paragraph tags, also known as the P tag. Now, as we said earlier, they all differ in terms of their size. So the H1 is the largest, and I'm going to be using the H2 because I don't want it to be too large. So I'm going to be using the H2 text tag, and I'm going to be writing the text lock star. Now, if I take a look at this, I wouldn't see it, and that's because the text is black in color. Let me change the color of the text. Let me change the color of the text just so that we can see it clearly. H2. Now let me change the color of the text. Color. Let me make that green, just so that we can see it clearly. Now, can you see the text all green in color? But if you take a look at our design, we have red for the first text LOC, and a different color like purple for the second text star. And we can actually achieve this very easily. To do that, we need a tag called a span tag. And a span tag defines the length or the width of a particular styling. Now, right inside of the H2 tag, I'm going to take out star and call span. And I'll put the star text right inside of the span. And right now, let me reduce the space between LOC and star. Now, take note. You can see they all have the green color. And it doesn't look like I've done anything different. But now, here's the trick. Because I've wrapped the start text in a different tag, I can now call that tag and begin to style it. Now, while my H2 is going to have a different color of red, let me make that red. As you can see, it's going to make the entire H2 tag text red. See? Now it makes the entire text red, but we also want to make the star text purple. And here's what we can do. We can call a span. We can call the span since we wrapped the text star in a span tag. So if we call the span tag, we would be referring to the star text. So now I can make that color purple. Great. Let me make it a lot lighter. Great. There we have it. And there you go. Now we've been able to repeat the same thing in a different way. This is just for educational purposes as well, but I'll be using the image. Since I already have the image, there will be no need to have multiple text. So I'll take out this styles because I wouldn't be needing them. Rather, I'll be needing the image instead. So instead of having the H2, I'll have an image tag asset logstar dot png. Let's take a look. Now we have the image. The next step would be to try to centralize the image. Would be to try to centralize the image, and we can do it in two different ways. Like I showed you earlier, we could use the margin auto property being called on the image. So let me give the image a class so that I can specifically pick it out, or rather, let me leave it without, let me give it a class so that I can specifically pick the image, and I'm going to call it image. So in my CSS now, I can call the image class now, and I can give it a margin of auto. Again, this actually breaks, but it's not going to stop us. So if this does not work, we'll take this out, and instead, right in the container, we can try to make sure that everything we have in the container is centered by calling the text align center property in the container. Now remember that the container is your div. So if I say text align center, it means whatever I have in the container should be at the center. Now you can see I have the image already centered. Now not only the image would be at the center, if you look at the design, I have everything I have here is actually at the center. All the contents of my div, they're all actually at the center. So now, by adding the text align property and setting its value to center, I've automatically done that, making sure that anything I add in the container class would be at the center. Now I'm going to give us a few seconds to try to repeat this step with the text align center property so that we can have exactly the same result as we currently have now. 80-year-old grandmother was trying to earn money to support herself, but she came straight to the casino. Then she bet a $24 chip on number 8 with the intention of giving it a try. However, to the surprise of no one, after dozens of runs of the rollerball and the roulette will finally stopped, the result is really open to number 8. Everyone applauded and marveled at the scene. In the end, the grandmother won the game. The casino paid her $480 at 1 to 20. Seeing that she had won so much money so easily and so quickly, the grandmother had an idea to double her bet, and this time she still bet on position 8. After the 2 chips were placed, the large circular started to run in high speed. At the same time, the grandmother's heart was accelerated, and her
Come on, take this out.
result was
I think
unexpected.
Mom, you have a phone.
The ball landed on number 8 without any deviation.
Carry the hand.
And the casino
Carry the hand.
paid
Come on, take this out and give it to me.
chips in front of her. The grandmother's heart surged, her blood boiled, and an even bolder idea was born. That's right. Let's not leave anything behind. Let's just
Hey,
take
grab
a
it,
lot of
Mom.
money
Oh, yeah,
in
go
this
now.
situation. The older man beside her quickly advised
I don't want
her. 80-year-old grandmother was trying to Okay, now I'm sure that we might have been able to repeat the whole steps. Right now, it's time to go on with other parts of our code. Now we can begin to try to add these input fields that it's called input fields in HTML. And we have a number of them. We have about 4 of them. The first field says full name, the second field says email, the third says password, and the last also says confirm password. So we're going to be adding all 4 input fields today, and I'll be telling us a lot about those input fields, and hopefully in our next session tomorrow we will be wrapping up with the designs. So first, let's add the input fields. Now, whenever you're expecting the users, by users I mean people that are going to use your website, to have to type in details, to have to type in text, what you need is an input field. But then, the type of input now depends on the type of data or the type of information you expect your users to fill in. Now, for the very first type, we expect a text, the complete name. The full name of your text is what we expect. So to do that, I would go right here, back to the HTML. And now, I'm going to put in the text. To do that, I have an input field. I'm going to call it input, and by default, we have the input type of text. There are a lot of other types, and in course of learning today, I'm going to mention a few other types, and I'm going to show us demonstrations of a few other types that we have as input types for HTML. But first, let's take a look at our results so far. Great. Now we have the inputs here, and of course, it's looking slightly not too nice, and that's because we added the input immediately right in our div. How about we group our inputs? So instead of adding the input directly, I'll instead have a div, and I'll have that div have a class of inputs, indicative of all the inputs I need. Now let's take a look at what we have now. No problems at all. And right now, in our inputs, I'm going to have my first input tag. And again, it's going to be the same type of text. Now you can see it appears right underneath it simply because I've been able to group it. So you can see the benefits of grouping your HTML elements. Now I'm going to add a few more input tags. Now the second input tag says, let's see, email. Notice how the first one I have an input of type text, but the second one we're going to have a different type. I'm going to have another input. Instead of having a type of text, I'm going to have email. Let's take a look at our results, and I'll be back to explain further. And these two inputs look exactly the same, except for that they actually are not. Now this only has an input of text, and this has an input type of email. What that means is there's what we refer to as client-side validation that comes with HTML by default. So if I add text here, what HTML is expecting us to add is simply text. But in this case, it's expecting a special kind of text called an email. And I'm sure we all know how an email looks like. A typical example is Flourish at gmail.com. Now, even though this is a text, the end part, which is referred to as the suffix, always comes with the at keyword and, of course, your domain. So without the at keyword in an input type of email, you're not going to be able to submit your form. That's exactly why we need to specify special attributes called type for our input field, depending on the type of input we expect our users. Now, if you do not understand that, please feel free to leave a comment down in the comment section below and we'll explain further in subsequent videos. Okay? Now, back to the major problem we have at hand. As you can see again from our design, we have the input fields appear one on top of the other. But what we've been able to do so far, they all appear side by side. And to make sure they don't appear side by side, all we need to do is add one special tag in HTML. And yes, you can guess that special tag. It's called the break tag. Now let's add the break tag. I'm going to add about 2 break tags to add a bit more spacing. So I have 2 break tags to add a lot of space, and our break tag helps us push the next element down onto a new line. Notice how they both have appeared from one line to the others. I will see on the first line and the second line simply by adding a break tag. Now I'm going to add more break tags so that I can add more input fields. Now, as you can see, the next input field we need to add is the password, and we have 2 of those input fields. So I'm going to add input field, and just like the text and email, we're going to have a type of password. And let me show you why having a type of password is very important and very necessary. Let's see. Now this is the third input field, and this is the one that has the type of password. Take a look at what happens whenever I try to type. Notice how I'm not able to see my text, what I'm typing, which is common with password authentication fields. Again, we have been able to add 3 fields, and let's add one more. Again, we have 2 break tags to add a bit more space. You can add as many break tags as you want, and the input and type, of course, is going to be password. And I'm going to add break tags because I also need buttons. I also need break tags. I'll add break tag. Good. Now let's take a look at what we've been able to achieve so far. It's looking good. It's looking good, but we still have a bit more to do. Now, we need to add a button. As you can see, the button says create account. And again, there are various ways of adding these buttons. We can add them using an input type called submit or a button. Now I'm going to show you both. First, I'm going to use the input type called submit. So I'm going to have another input called submit. And as you can see, I have a button down that says submit simply by asking HTML to give me an input with a type called submit. Can you see? And I can repeat the same thing in a different way by actually using a button. Yes, there is a tag called button tag in HTML. So you could do this by typing the text button, and I'll type in the exact text you want called submit. And we'll get the same result. Here we go. Now we have exactly the same result, and I'm going to stick with the button instead. Again, I'm going to give us about a minute to try to recreate all these steps, and I'll see you after we have been able to create that. Okay, so I believe we have been able to recreate exactly what we have on our screen. Now let's learn a little bit more. First, now let us also try to add text inside. Now notice from our design, we have text called full name, email, password, and confirm password. And I believe these texts are just purely indicators. As you can see, they are written in very faint colors. So we can achieve the same design by simply specifying an attribute called placeholder. Now a placeholder in HTML helps us hold the place of an actual text till we decide to write the text. And it has a lot more functions because adding a placeholder gives the user an example of what he is expected to enter in the design. Now I'm going to be adding placeholders for all input fields so far. Now walk with me. Now for the first one, the placeholder will be added as an attribute, placeholder, and as you can see in the design, it says full name. Great. Now for the second one, we have another placeholder, and that placeholder says email. And for the third one, we also have a placeholder, and the placeholder says password. And for the last one, we also have another placeholder, and it says confirm password. Great. Here we go. Now, notice how all those texts have been filled as placeholders for our inputs. Now, I'm sure we would be able to recreate this same design. So I'm going to give a few seconds for us to try to recreate this design as well.
This machine's blades are moving so fast, it looks like they are barely moving. But watch what happens when this guy puts the cucumbers there.
Alright, now I believe we must have been able to recreate this design as we have now. If you haven't and you have any difficulties, please feel free to leave a comment down below and we'll do well to get back to you with solutions to whatever problems you have. And again, we'll be leaving the codes we have so far down below in the descriptions. So feel free to download the code and follow us in our journey tomorrow as well, same time, to try to wrap up with our design. Okay, it's wonderful having you guys join me in this journey of creating a registration form in HTML and CSS, and I believe that we would have learned a whole lot so far. So join me same time tomorrow and we would be wrapping up with designs. So that'll be all for today's session, and it's bye for now, and see you same time tomorrow. Bye.